Welcome back. This is part 4 of The Secret of the Old Clock story. Let's continue the journey with the new chapter, Chapter 20, titled, What Nancy Found.
While Nancy Drew hesitated, uncertain which way to turn, her mind worked more clearly than ever before. She realized instantly that she could not hope to run to the front of the car and place the keys under the seat where she had found them. Instead of attempting the impossible, she flung them upon the floor. Then, glancing frantically about for a hiding place, she saw an empty manger. Running to it, she scrambled inside and dropped the blanket over her head just as one of the barn doors swung open. 3 men came in, closing the door after them, and, as Nancy had suspected, they were the robbers. Evidently, they had been drinking, for they were quarreling among themselves over the division of spoils. "Ah, shut up," the leader growled. "Get in and let's be getting out of here before we have the cops down on our heads." Nancy heard him rummaging under the seat of the car. "Say, what did you do with them keys?" he demanded harshly of one of his men. "What do you suppose?" came the unpleasant response. "I put 'em under the seat." "Then come and find 'em, and don't be all day about it either." "All right, get out of the way and give me a chance." As the second robber went to the truck and began a careful search for the keys, Nancy Drew crouched fearfully in her hiding place. "I don't see what could have happened to them keys," the robber complained after an unsuccessful search. "I put 'em right under this seat." "Say if you've lost 'em." The leader did not finish the threat, for at that moment the third robber stooped over and picked up something at his feet. "Here they are on the floor. You must have put 'em in your pocket and dropped 'em out." "I didn't," the other retorted. "I never had them keys in my pocket." The robbers were in a quarrelsome mood and would have engaged in a battle then and there had not the leader interposed. "Say, cut out the comedy. We ain't got no time for a fight unless we want to land behind the bars. And if we do, it will be your fault. You left that girl to starve." "Shut up," the leader snarled. He rattled the rear door of the van and found it locked. "There's no harm done this time. No one has meddled with the truck. Now get in before I give you a swift kick." After a few more angry words, the 3 robbers climbed into the front seat and started the engine. Due to their inebriated condition, they had overlooked the barn doors, and before the van could be backed from the building, it was necessary for one of the men to get out and fasten them back. In relief, Nancy watched the men go. The moment they were a safe distance from the barn, she scrambled out of the manger. She paused long enough to make certain that the van had taken the road to Garwin, then, clutching the precious clock in her arms, she turned and ran. As Nancy darted into the woods, she cast an anxious glance over her shoulder, but to her intense relief, she saw that she was not being followed. There was no one to be seen in the vicinity of the roadhouse, and the big moving van was proceeding slowly on its way towards Garwin, the occupants oblivious that their whereabouts had been discovered. "I had a narrow escape that time," Nancy told herself as she ran. "I hate to think of my fate if I had been discovered." She chuckled softly at her own bravado and clutched the mantel clock more tightly in her arms. "Oh, well, it was worth the risk I took." It was dark in the woods, and Nancy could see only a few feet ahead of her. To her chagrin, she discovered that she had left her automobile flashlight somewhere in the barn, probably in the manger. There was no time to go back after it. Confident that her sense of direction was good, she plunged through the bushes towards the place where she had parked her roadster. "I'm sure the clock is the right one," she thought. "Now, if it only contains Josiah Crowley's notebook." In the timber, there was insufficient light for her to examine the clock, but from the hasty glance she had given it in the barn, she was almost certain it was the timepiece Abigail Rowan had described to her. If the old woman's story was correct, she would find Josiah Crowley's notebook inside. Reaching the roadster and finding it exactly as she had left it, the girl sprang inside. "I'll go for the police as fast as I can and send them after the robbers. The Tophams don't deserve any consideration, but I couldn't be mean enough to sit quietly by and let them lose their household goods." Then, as she was about to start the motor, her glance fell upon the Crowley clock which she had placed on the seat beside her. She was fairly overcome with curiosity to learn what it would reveal. As she hesitated, she found it impossible to resist the temptation of investigating it immediately, even at the cost of a few minutes' delay. Impulsively, she opened the glass door and ran her hand around the walls. There was nothing inside.
gone, Nancy groaned. Could it be that the Tophams had discovered the notebook to destroy it? Nancy discarded the thought as quickly as it came to mind, for she recalled the conversation she had overheard between Ada and Isabel. No, they were as ignorant as herself concerning the location of the will. It was more likely that Abigail Rowan had been confused in her story. After all, she had not declared that the notebook would be found inside the clock. Nancy had made the deduction herself. "I was almost certain I'd find the notebook," she murmured in disappointment. "It must be here somewhere." Turning the clock upside down, she gave it a hard shake. Something rattled. Hopefully, she repeated the action. Undoubtedly, there was something bulky inside. It must be the notebook, Nancy thought in excitement. How could I get it off? After a vain attempt to remove the heavy cardboard face with her fingers, she lifted the automobile seat and found a small tool with which she could pry. It then required but an instant to remove the two hands of the clock and jerk off the face. As the cardboard fell to the floor, Nancy peered hopefully inside and gave a low cry of delight. Eureka! There, at one side of the clock, attached to a hook in the top, dangled a tiny blue notebook.
This marks the end of Chapter 20. We now move into the next chapter of story, Chapter 21, titled Capturing the Robbers. Eagerly, Nancy Drew tore the little notebook from the hook. The light was dim, but by holding the book directly under the dashlight, she could make out the words on the cover. The property of Josiah Crowley. "I've found it at last!" she cried. Quickly turning the first few pages, she saw that they were yellowed with age. The writing was fine and cramped, and the ink had faded. These pages were crowded with business notations, but in the poor light it was next to impossible to make out the words. Nancy was excited, for she was positive that the notebook would disclose what Josiah Crowley had done with his will. Yet she realized that she could not hope to read through the book without a considerable loss of precious time. If she were to report the whereabouts of the robbers to the police, she must not delay another instant. "I'll read the notebook later," she decided. Hurriedly replacing it on the hook inside the clock, she tacked on the face again. Then, dropping the timepiece on the seat beside her, she covered it with a blanket. Starting the engine, she skillfully backed the roadster and headed for the main road. Reaching the highway, she cast an anxious glance in the direction the robbers had taken. There was no sign of a light on the road. The moving van had disappeared. "I must travel some now," Nancy told herself grimly. "Those robbers have at least 10 minutes start, and I may have trouble finding the marshal and his deputies." Bending low over the steering wheel, she deliberately stepped hard on the accelerator. The roadster leapt forward as though it too comprehended the need for haste. "If those men reach Garwin before the marshal overtakes them, there won't be one chance in 100 of capturing them," Nancy thought. "It was foolish of me to take time to look at the clock." Presently, reaching the fork in the road, she selected the right-hand turn and, with undiminished speed, rushed on. She had gone several miles beyond the fork when far ahead she caught sight of an automobile headlight. Nancy promptly reduced the speed of the car. "The marshal and his deputies may have given up the search and are coming back," she reasoned. "I must be careful not to pass them." As the automobile approached, Nancy slowed her roadster practically to a standstill. Then, as she recognized the police car, she brought her own automobile to a halt. As the marshal and his deputies flashed by, she cried out for them to stop. There was a loud screeching of brakes as the police car came to an abrupt halt. Springing from the roadster, Nancy ran forward. "Quick! The robbers have taken the road to Garwin. If you hurry, you can overtake them. Go on, and I'll follow." Without waiting for more, the marshal and his deputies drove off at top speed. The automobile rounded a bend and was lost to view. For an instant, Nancy Drew stood looking after it. Then, springing into her roadster, she too was off. Following close behind the police car, the girl sped down the road in pursuit of the robbers. The two automobiles passed the roadhouse beyond the fork and raced toward Garwin. "We should have overtaken the robbers by this time," Nancy told herself anxiously, after a number of miles had been traversed and still there was no sight of a moving van. "They can't have gone very far."
10 minutes passed, then unexpectedly she caught a glimpse of a red taillight on the road far ahead. It must be the van, Nancy thought. The light doesn't appear to be moving fast enough for an automobile. Evidently, the marshal and his deputies were of the same opinion, for at that moment the police car slowed down. "Don't fire unless it's necessary," the marshal ordered his men, "but if they resist, pepper them." Cautiously, the police car approached. As the headlight played upon the rear of the van, Nancy saw the license plate clearly and recognized the numbers. Then, as the van pulled over to the side of the road, the police car drove alongside. "Halt!" came the order. The van did not stop. Instead, it put on additional speed and crowded the police car toward the ditch. Nancy's heart was in her mouth as she watched, for it seemed certain that the marshal and his deputies were doomed. At the very edge of the road, the police car, by a sudden spurt of speed, forged ahead and averted disaster. "Halt!" rang out the warning cry a second time. "Halt or we'll fire!" There was a sharp crack of a revolver as the robbers fired the first shot.
The marshal and his deputies answered with a quick volley. One of the shots found its mark, the front tire. The van swerved in the road, and as the two side wheels went off into a steep ditch, toppled over. In an instant, the marshal and his men were out of the police car and had covered the three robbers. So easily had the van tipped on its side that the men were not injured, but the unexpected jar had thrown them off their guard. "Take their guns," the marshal ordered. A deputy relieved the three men of their revolvers and searched their pockets for other dangerous weapons. Another deputy handcuffed them. By this time, Nancy, who had stopped her roadster at the side of the road, reached the scene. As she came running up, the marshal turned to her. "Can you identify these men?" As a light was flashed upon each of the robbers in turn, Nancy nodded. "There is the man who locked me up and left me to starve," she declared, pointing to the leader of the robber band. "And the stolen goods are in the van." "They'll get 10 or 20 years for this," the marshal promised. "We'll hold them on several charges. You're willing to testify against them, I suppose?" "Yes, if it's necessary," Nancy promised reluctantly. "But I don't live in this county, and I'm anxious to get home right away. It seems to me you have enough evidence to convict them." "Well, if you don't want to, I guess there's no need for you to go back with us," the marshal admitted. "I'll take your address, and if your testimony should be required later, I'll get in touch with you." As Nancy told the marshal her name and address, he glanced at her with new interest. "So you're the daughter of Carson Drew. I see you're following in his footsteps, starting in young, aren't you?" Nancy laughed. "It was only an accident that took me to the Topham bungalow at the critical moment. I don't deserve any credit for the roundup." "Not many girls would have used their brains the way you did," the marshal observed. "Unless I'm mistaken, these robbers are old hands at the game. They've been plying their trade around Moon Lake for a number of seasons. The residents will be mighty grateful for what you've done. And that Mrs. Topham you spoke of, she ought to give you a liberal reward for saving her household goods." Nancy shook her head. "I don't want a reward." "Just the same, you've earned one," the marshal insisted. "If you're shy about blowing your own horn, I'll take it up with this Mrs. Topham myself." "You don't know her as well as I do," Nancy remarked. "She'll not offer a reward, and even if she did, I wouldn't accept it. In fact, I must ask you not to mention my name to her at all." "You don't want any credit for capturing the robbers?" the marshal gasped in astonishment. "No, I would prefer that my name not be mentioned in connection with the affair. I have a particular reason for making the request." "Well, you're a queer one," the marshal remarked. "You're the first person I ever saw who didn't want to take all the glory that was coming to him. You will not mention my name?" "Nope, I'll keep it mum," the marshal promised. "And if you're anxious not to figure in the case, I guess we can get along without your testimony." He turned towards the moving van. "I'll just have a look inside and see if everything is here." Taking the keys which one of the deputies had turned over to him, the marshal unlocked the rear doors of the van and carelessly glanced inside. "It's all here," he announced. Nancy smiled and thought of the clock, which at the moment was hidden under a blanket in her roadster less than a dozen yards away. "Let's be getting away from here," the marshal directed briskly.
He singled out one of the deputies. "You stay here and guard the stolen goods until we can send another truck after it. I'll see to it that these robbers land behind bars, and then I'll come back." "Just a minute," Auntie interposed as the marshal was about to escort the 3 robbers to the police car. "I want to ask a few questions." She turned to the leader of the robbers. "It was you who stole the keys from Jeff Tucker after getting him drunk, wasn't it?" "What if I did? I wish I'd finished him." Unceremoniously, the 3 prisoners were crowded into the police car. One of the deputies took the steering wheel, and another stood on the running board, covering the robbers with his revolver. There was no room left for the marshal. "Are you going back through town?" he asked Nancy. "Yes, it's right on my way to River Heights," she responded, without a thought about the purpose of the question. "Then, if you don't mind, I'll ride back with you. There isn't room in the police car." Why, of course," she stammered. At once, she thought of the clock which she had left on the seat of the roadster. What if the marshal would discover it? Even as the thought came to her, the marshal started towards the roadster.
This marks the end of Chapter 21. We now move into the next chapter of story, Chapter 22, titled What the Notebook Revealed.
"Just a minute," Nancy Drew stammered as she darted toward the roadster, blocking the marshal's path. "There's a package in the seat. I'll put it in the back." Hastily, she picked up the clock, which was covered with a blanket. "Never mind that," the marshal interposed. "I can hold it." "Oh, it's no trouble to put it in the catch-all at the back," Nancy assured him. "Then it will be out of your way." Before the man could offer to do it for her, she had carried the clock to the rear of the car. Lifting the cover, she placed it on the floor. During the ride back to town, Nancy Drew was anything but easy in her mind, but she gave no indication that she was nervous. It was not until she had said goodbye to the marshal at the jail that she felt entirely safe. "That was a narrow escape," she laughed as she drove away. "It might not have gone so well with me if the marshal had discovered stolen goods in my car. It certainly wouldn't have been easy to explain how I came by that clock." Although it was late, Nancy was determined to return to River Heights that night. She was anxious to examine the notebook and learn whether or not it would disclose the hiding place of Josiah Crowley's second will. "Oh, I'm so eager to get home and have a chance to dig into the notebook," she thought as she drove along the road. "I went through a lot to get it, and I'll be disappointed if it doesn't contain good news. It will mean so much to the Horner girls and poor old Abigail if the will is found." It was nearly 10 o'clock that night when Nancy, tired and worn from the long automobile ride, reached her home in River Heights. As she drove into the double garage, she noticed that her father's car was gone. A glance at the house disclosed that the windows were dark. "I wonder where Father can be," she questioned herself. "I wanted to tell him about my discovery right away." She removed the Crowley clock from the back of the roadster and paused an instant to gloat over it. She was well satisfied with the result of her detective work. Locking the garage door, she went inside and switched on the electric light. The house seemed deserted, for Hannah, the maid, had already retired. "Father is probably working late at the office," Nancy decided. "Oh well, I may as well stay up, and while I'm waiting, I'll have a look at the notebook." During the long ride from Moon Lake, she had been impatient for an opportunity to examine the Crowley notebook, and now she lost no time in finding a screwdriver. She took off the face of the clock and from the hook removed the notebook. "Now to find what became of the will," she declared as she curled up in a comfortable chair near a reading lamp. "Oh, I hope everything turns out right for Allie and Grace and for Abigail Rowan." Carefully, Nancy thumbed over the pages, for they were yellowed with age, and she was afraid they might tear. Evidently, Josiah Crowley had used the same notebook for many years. Page after page the girl read, perusing inconsequential memoranda and numerous notations of property owned by Josiah Crowley, as well as various business transactions made by him. Nancy was surprised at the list of stocks, bonds, and notes which apparently belonged to the estate. The amount reached well over $300,000. "I had no idea Josiah Crowley had that much money," she murmured. After a time, she grew impatient of the seemingly endless list, and skipping many pages, turned ahead. Suddenly, the phrase, "my will," caught and held her attention. Eagerly, Nancy pounced upon it and began to read. "I found it at last," she told herself in excitement. The notation was brief and written in Josiah Crowley's cramped hand. "To whom it concern, my last will and testament will be found in safety deposit box number 148 in the Masonville National Bank. The box is under the name of Josiah Harkston." The date of this entry was recent, and the ink had not faded as in the earlier entries in the notebook. "Then there was another will," Nancy exclaimed aloud. "Oh, I'm sure it must be in favor of the Horner girls, too." She hurriedly read on, but although she carefully examined every page in the book, there was no other mention of the will.
No wonder the will never came to light, Nancy mused. Who would have ever thought of looking for it in a safety deposit box under the name of Josiah Harkston? In his zest for safety, Josiah Crowley nearly defeated his own purpose. Her thoughts were interrupted as she heard an automobile turning in at the drive. Rushing to the window, Nancy saw her father drive into the garage. As he opened the front door, she ran to meet him. "Why, hello, Nancy," he greeted her in surprise. "If I had known you were here, I'd have come home sooner. I was doing some special work on a case. Back from Moon Lake early, aren't you?" "Yes," Nancy admitted, trying to hide her excitement, "but for a good reason." Before her father could remove his hat, she plunged into the story of her adventures and ended by showing him the notebook which she had found inside the mantel clock. When she had finished, Carson Drew stared at her with mingled pride and amusement. "You're a regular detective, Nancy. You're making fun of me." Carson Drew's face sobered. "No, I'm proud of what you've done, Nancy. I couldn't have done better myself. Perhaps not so well. You took a real risk when you encountered those robbers, but so long as you're back home safe and sound, it doesn't matter. The Tophams aren't going to thank me when they find out what I have done." "Hardly. They may accuse you of stealing their clock, although so long as their house was open when you entered, they can't claim that you broke in. However, if we can manage to keep the knowledge from them, it will be just as well that they don't learn the details of how the will was found." Carson Drew picked up the notebook and glanced through it with interest. "The fortune will make a nice nest egg for someone," he commented as he looked over the lists of stocks and bonds owned by Crowley. "These securities are of the best, too, all gilt edge." "I hope the Tophams will be cut off without a cent," Nancy declared. "It's likely they will be, but of course you never can be certain until the will is read. Unless I'm mistaken, your discovery will strike the Tophams at an especially awkward time." "What do you mean?" "Well, there's a rumor going the rounds to the effect that Richard Topham has been losing heavily in the stock market this last month. He's been getting credit at a number of the banks on the strength of the inheritance, and I suspect he's depending on Crowley's money to pull him through a tight place. At least he's made every effort to speed up the settlement of the estate." "It would serve the Tophams right if they lose everything," Nancy decidedly said. "They never had a particle of charity for anyone. They would let their relatives starve before they would help them." Carson Drew glanced again at the notebook in his hand. "Now that you have found this, the thing to do is locate the will at once before Richard Topham gets wind of what is up," he advised. "We want to administer the coup de grace before the Tophams have a chance to get the fortune into their hands. Once the estate is settled, it will not be easy to wrest it away from them." "I'd like to turn the matter over to you," promptly Nancy responded. "I'm not familiar with legal procedure, and you know exactly what should be done." "I'll be glad to help you if I can, Nancy. The first thing, of course, is to get our hands on the will." "That should be easy. We can drive over to Masonville National Bank the first thing in the morning." "Yes, but we haven't authority to open the safety deposit box. It may be necessary to get a court order," Carson Drew reminded his daughter. "That's so. I hadn't thought of that. But you can manage it, can't you?" Carson Drew chuckled. "Well, I know the judge. Yes, I think I can arrange it all right. I'll tell him I'm acting as counsel for the Horner girls. I really am, because I promised I would help them if I could." "I'm sure everything is going to turn out just as I hoped," Nancy cried enthusiastically. "The deserving relatives will get the money, and the Tophams will be left out in the cold. Abigail Rowan will be able to have the medical attention she needs, and Allie and Grace will be fixed for life." "Don't build your hopes too high," Carson Drew advised her wisely. "There may be a slip, you know.
We may fail to find the will in the deposit box, and of course there's a chance that Josiah Crowley didn't dispose of the fortune as it was expected that he would. If I were you, I wouldn't say anything to the Horner girls until we're certain." "I won't," Nancy promised as she turned toward the stairs. "But I can't help hoping. I'm going to bed now and get a good night's rest. Then tomorrow we'll start off on the big adventure. Oh, I can hardly wait to find out what the will contains." Halfway up the stairs, she hesitated and then returned to the living room and picked up the notebook which rested on the table. "After all I've gone through to get my hands on this, I'm not going to take any chances. Tonight I'm going to sleep with it under my pillow."
This marks the end of Chapter 22. We now move into the next chapter of story, Chapter 23, titled Looking for the Will. When Nancy Drew awoke the following morning, the bright sunlight was streaming in at her open bedroom window. As her eyes turned toward the little clock on her dresser, she was alarmed to see that it was after 9 o'clock. "How could I oversleep on a morning like this?" she asked herself. Quickly running her hand under the pillow, she brought out the Crowley notebook and surveyed it with satisfaction. "Oh, what a surprise the Tophams are going to get!" she chuckled softly. Hastily dressing, Nancy hurried downstairs. She found that her father had already left for the office. "Oh dear," she thought, "I wonder if he forgot." At that moment, Hannah appeared from the kitchen, bearing a plate of crisp, steaming waffles. "Your father said I was to tell you to go to his office just as soon as you finish your breakfast," she informed Nancy. "He said you were to bring your notebook." "My notebook? Oh, yes, I know what he meant. It won't take long to eat breakfast," she predicted as she seated herself at the table. After a hasty meal, she climbed into the roadster and drove to her father's office. She found him alone in the inner office. "I'm sorry I overslept this morning," Nancy apologized. "Have I kept you waiting?" "Not at all," her father assured her pleasantly. "I told Hannah not to awaken you because I knew you needed rest after your hard day yesterday. And anyway, we couldn't do anything about the will without an order from the court. Did you get it?" "Yes, I saw the judge early this morning. After explaining everything to him, he gave me the paper. I have it here." Carson Drew tapped an inside pocket. "I brought the notebook with me. You wanted it, didn't you?" "Yes, I thought it might be necessary to show it to the judge, but we won't need it now. However, it may be well to put it in the safe. I'll do it now." Carson Drew took the notebook from Nancy and after placing it inside a small safe, closed and locked the door. "When shall we start for Masonville?" Nancy asked somewhat impatiently. "Right now, if you are ready." After leaving a number of instructions with his private secretary, Carson Drew followed his daughter from the office. He took his place beside her in the roadster. "I'll never get over it if we don't find the will," she declared as they drove along. A flush of excitement had tinted her cheeks, and her eyes were bright. "You must remember one thing, Nancy," returned her father calmly. "Crowley was a queer character and did things in a queer way, so the will may be there, and again it may not. Perhaps he left only further directions in a box. I remember one case in Canada many years ago. An eccentric Frenchman died, and he left directions to look in a trunk of old clothes. In the pocket of a coat were found further directions to look in a closet of his home. There his family found directions to look in a copper boiler. The boiler had disappeared and was finally located in a curiosity shop. Inside, on the bottom, was pasted what proved to be a word puzzle. The old Frenchman's heirs were about to give up in despair when a puzzler solved the puzzle and the man's bag of gold was found under a board in his bedroom. "Oh, but they found it anyway," breathed Nancy. The trip to Masonville was quickly accomplished, and in a short time Nancy stopped the roadster in front of the Masonville National Bank. "You may as well come too," Mr. Drew said as Nancy hesitated. Parking the car at the curbing, the two entered the bank. Mr. Drew offered his professional card and asked to see the president. After a few minutes of wait, they were ushered into a private conference room. An elderly man arose to greet them. The introductions accomplished, Mr. Drew hastened to state his mission. Before he could finish the story, the bank president cut him short. "I'm afraid you have come to the wrong place.
To my knowledge, we have never had dealings with a man named Josiah Crowley. Perhaps you did not know him by that name. I believe he had a deposit box here under the name of Josiah Harkston." "Josiah Harkston?" the banker repeated thoughtfully. "It seems to me we have been trying to get in touch with a man by that name. If I remember correctly, the rent on his safety deposit box has not been paid for some time. If you will wait a moment, I will find out." The banker left the room. He returned in a few minutes with a sheet of paper in his hand.
According to our record, Josiah Harkston rented box 148 from us, but the past year the rent has not been paid. Here is his signature if you care to look at it." Eagerly, Nancy and her father examined the sheet of paper which the banker handed them. At a glance, they saw that the writing was in the cramped hand of Josiah Crowley. "It may be that Crowley and Harkston were the same person, as you say," the banker continued, "but we have no authority to permit you to examine the contents of the safety deposit box." "I have an order from the court," Mr. Drew said quietly. "Oh, that is different." The banker's attitude underwent a sudden change. "May I see the document, please?" "Certainly." Mr. Drew removed the paper from his pocket and handed it to the banker. After examining it for a minute, the president returned it. "You find it satisfactory?" Mr. Drew asked. "Perfectly. You're welcome to open the safety deposit box, of course in the presence of a bank official. I suppose you have the key." Nancy's face fell. She had never once thought of the key. "We have no key," Mr. Drew admitted. "Isn't there one in the bank which will fit the box?" He knew some small banks had this. "No, we did away with that when we got our regular vault," said the banker. "But wait a minute," he added suddenly. "I think I can help you out." He disappeared into another part of the bank and presently came back holding up a sealed envelope. "That man had 2 keys for his box, and he left one here in my possession, sealed up, as you can see. As you have a court order, I feel you are entitled to this key," and he handed the envelope to Mr. Drew. The envelope was marked with Josiah Crowley's assumed name, also the number of his box. It contained a small flat key, nothing more. "Now we will go to the boxes," said the bank official. Nancy and her father followed the president into the main part of the bank. They were then admitted into a small room which was protected by heavily barred doors. Finally, they entered the vault which contained the safety deposit boxes. The president inserted a small key in a lock, then used the key given to Mr. Drew, and finally pulled out a metal box which bore the number 148. Politely, he handed the box to Mr. Drew, who quickly lifted the lid and peered inside. Unable to resist the temptation, Nancy peeped over her father's shoulder. The box was empty save for one document in the bottom. "Oh, it must be the will!" Nancy cried before Mr. Drew could examine the paper. "It is the will," her father announced after a hasty glance at the document. "A will, eh?" said the bank official with keen interest. "Yes, and I will ask you to do me a favor. Kindly place your initials on each page so you can later on identify it if necessary, and I will do the same." "Certainly, Mr. Drew. I've done that before." Mr. Drew thanked the president for the help he had given, and with Nancy left the bank. Once they had gained the comparative privacy of the roadster, they grinned at each other like 2 mischievous youngsters. "Well, we put it over, eh, Nancy?" "We certainly did. But read the will. I'm dying to find out what it says. I can't stand the suspense another minute." The will comprised several pages, all written in Josiah Crowley's cramped style. Mr. Drew spread the pages out before him, and Nancy pored over them. Not only was the fine writing difficult to make out, but the legal terms were confusing. "It's going to be a terrible task to study it all out," complained Nancy. "Yes, I think we had better take it to the office," Mr. Drew suggested. He picked up the last page of the will and studied it closely. "I see Dr. Nesbit signed as a witness. No wonder the will never came to light. If you remember, he died a few days after Crowley. Thomas Wackley, the other witness, I never heard of." "Oh, I don't care who witnessed the will," Nancy said impatiently. "I want to find out if Allie and Grace and poor Abigail got anything. I can't make head nor tail out of it." "I see their names are mentioned," Mr. Drew told her, pointing to one of the pages. "Oh, I'm so glad. So long as I know they're taken care of, I suppose I can wait until we get to your office to find out the details. We can have the will copied in typewriting." "Yes, I want to go over the document carefully. It's evident that Crowley drew it up himself, and I want to make certain it is legal." "Oh, do you think there's any danger it won't be?" Nancy questioned anxiously. "I can't tell until I go over it in detail, Nancy, but from a hasty examination, it appears that the Tophams aren't mentioned, and they're certain to make trouble if they can. I want to make certain there is no way for them to break the will before I notify them we have it in our possession." Mr. Drew folded the papers and placed them carefully in his pocket. As Nancy started the motor in preparation for the return trip to River Heights, she began to chuckle. "If the will does prove to be legal, won't it be a blow for the Tophams? I'd give a lot to see how they take it. I think it would be a splendid idea to call a meeting of all the relatives and read the will aloud." "I'm afraid you have a dark motive behind that idea," Mr. Drew laughed, "but I'll try to humor you this time. What's more, I'll promise that you may be present when the coup de grace is administered to the Tophams."
This marks the end of Chapter 23. We now move into the next chapter of story, Chapter 24, titled The Coup de Grace.
"Oh, Father, it's nearly 2 o'clock now. The relatives should be coming in a few minutes. I'm so excited." Carson Drew, who stood in the living room of the Drew home, smiled indulgently at his daughter as she fluttered about arranging chairs. "I believe you're more thrilled than if you were inheriting the fortune yourself," he remarked. "I am thrilled," admitted Nancy. "I can scarcely wait until the will is read aloud. Won't everyone be surprised? Especially the Tophams. Do you think they will come?" "Oh, yes, the Tophams will be here, and unless I am mistaken, they will bring a lawyer with them. Just as soon as they learned that another will had come to light, they began to worry." "Are you certain the will can't be broken?" Nancy inquired anxiously. "Of course I can't be certain, Nancy, but I've gone over it carefully, and so far as I can tell, it is technically perfect. Josiah Crowley was peculiar in some ways, but he was no one's fool. I'll promise you the Tophams will have a difficult time of it if they try to break the will." After locating the Crowley will in a safety deposit box at the Masonville National Bank in the town of Masonville, Carson Drew and his daughter had read it carefully. Without disclosing the contents to anyone, they had called a special meeting of the relatives at the Drew home. With the exception of Abigail Rowan, who was confined to her bed, all had promised to be present. Grace and Allie Horner, although not relatives, had also been invited to attend the meeting. "It's too bad Abigail Rowan can't come," said Nancy, "but we'll get the news to her fast enough." "It will probably be a great surprise all around," said her father with a little smile. "Nancy, you have done a remarkable piece of work." "Oh, I can't hardly wait to have it all cleared up," cried the happy girl. "We may have some hard minutes with the Tophams, Nancy." "Yes, I suppose so. I suppose anybody would be sorry to see a fortune slipping away." "Well, we'll see what happens," returned the lawyer. "The Horner girls are coming up the walk now," Nancy announced, glancing out of the window. "I'm dying to tell them the news, but I'll wait." She greeted Allie and Grace cordially and escorted them to comfortable chairs in the living room. "Is it true the will has been found?" whispered Allie. "You and Grace have no cause to worry," assured her Nancy with a mysterious smile. No sooner had she seated the Horner sisters than the doorbell rang again. This time she admitted Edna and Matilda Turner, who were dressed in their best black silk gowns. A few minutes later, the Matthews brothers, William and Fred, arrived. "I guess everyone is here now except the Tophams," Carson Drew commented. "We had better wait for them a few minutes." There was no need to wait, for at that moment the doorbell jangled sharply. Nancy opened the door, and the 4 members of the Topham family sailed grandly in. As Carson Drew had predicted, they were accompanied by a lawyer. "Why have we been called here?" Mrs. Topham demanded, addressing Mr. Drew. "Have you the audacity to claim that another will has been found?" "I have the will here, Mrs. Topham," replied Carson politely. "It's preposterous," Mrs. Topham stormed. "Josiah Crowley made only one will, and in that he left everything to us." "It looks like a conspiracy to me," Ada added tartly, as she gazed coldly upon the relatives who were seated about the room. Isabel did not speak, but tossed her head contemptuously. Richard Topham likewise did not offer a comment, but uneasily seated himself beside the lawyer who had accompanied him. "If you will kindly be seated, Mrs. Topham, we will read the will," Mr. Drew suggested. Reluctantly, Mrs. Topham obeyed. As you have probably learned by this time, a second will of the late Josiah Crowley has been found in a safety deposit box in a Masonville bank. The will is unusually long, and with your permission I will read only the portions which have to do with the disposal of the property. Mr. Drew picked up several sheets of typewriting from the table, and after a moment's hesitation began to read in a clear voice. "I, Josiah Crowley, do make this my last will and testament, hereby revoking all former wills by me at any time made. I give and bequeath all my property, real and personal, as follows. To my beloved friends and neighbors, Allie and Grace Horner, the sum of $75,000 each." "Oh, I can't believe it," Allie gasped. "Neither can I," Mrs. Topham snapped. $150,000 when they aren't even relatives. Why, that's nearly half of the estate. The will is a fraud." "There is no mistake," Mr. Drew told her quietly. Again he picked up the will and began to read. "To my beloved friend Abigail Rowan, in consideration of her kindness to me, the sum of $75,000. "Oh, I'm so glad," Grace murmured. "Now she'll be able to get the medical attention she needs," Allie added. "I wish she could have been here," Nancy said quietly, "but I'll see to it that she is notified before the day is over." "That old lady gets $75,000? Ada Topham demanded harshly. "What did she ever do for Crowley? We kept him for years, and this is the pay we get?" "To my nephews, Fred and William Matthews, the sum of $20,000 each." "We didn't expect that much," the Matthews brothers declared in genuine surprise. "To my cousins, Edna and Matilda Turner, the sum of $20,000 each." "Oh, how generous," Edna murmured. "Aren't we mentioned at all?" Mrs. Topham broke in sharply. Mr. Drew smiled. "Yes, you are mentioned, but perhaps not in the way you anticipate. I'm coming to that now."
To Grace and Allie Horner, my household furniture now in the possession of Mrs. Richard Topham. There was a gasp of surprise from everyone in the room, and Mrs. Topham half arose from her chair. It was generally known about River Heights that the Tophams had practically confiscated Josiah Crowley's furniture at the time they induced him to make his home with them. "How insulting!" Mrs. Topham cried. "Does Josiah Crowley dare hint that I took his furniture?" "I'm sure I don't know what was in his mind at the time he wrote the will," Carson Drew told her with a smile. "Oh, we have enough without the furniture," Grace interposed quickly. "Haven't we, Allie?" Allie nodded. "We'll not take the household goods from you, Mrs. Topham." Carson Drew carefully folded the document he had been reading, and after placing it in a drawer, turned to the relatives. "That is all there is, except that there is a proviso to pay all his just debts, including his funeral expenses, and that what little balance is left, maybe $3,000 or $4,000, goes to the Manningham Old Men's Home. Fortunately, Josiah Crowley kept his assets in a liquid state. It will not be difficult to convert the estate into cash. For that reason, I should think it would be possible to draw on your inheritances at once." "We're actually cut off without a cent?" Richard Topham asked in disbelief. His face was unusually white. "I am afraid you are," Mr. Drew replied. "But it can't be," Mr. Topham returned. "You don't understand. I must have the money." "I can't help you. I did not make the will." "It's a conspiracy," Ada cried bitterly.
She wheeled upon Nancy, her face convulsed with anger. "You had something to do with this, Nancy Drew," she said bitterly. "Perhaps I had," Nancy admitted pleasantly. "We'll break the will," Mrs. Topham announced firmly. "Of course, you may drag the matter into court if you like," Mr. Drew responded, "but I warn you it will only be a waste of your time and money. If you don't wish to accept my judgment, ask your own lawyer." "Mr. Drew is right," the lawyer said promptly, without waiting for Mrs. Topham to question him. "Oh, he is he?" Mrs. Topham retorted. "If that's all you know about law, you're discharged. We'll get another lawyer, and we'll fight to the last ditch." With that, she arose and stalked grandly from the room. Isabel and Ada followed, after bestowing a withering glance upon Nancy. Mr. Topham brought up the rear. As soon as the door had closed behind them, their lawyer arose and picked up his briefcase. "Well, I can't say I'm sorry to lose the case," he remarked to Mr. Drew, as he too took his leave. At once the atmosphere became less strained. Everyone began to talk at once. "Oh, Nancy, I can hardly believe it yet," Allie declared happily. "The money means so much to Grace and me, and we owe it all to you, Nancy Drew. You haven't told us how you came to find the will, but I know you were responsible." As the Horner girls and Mr. Crowley's relatives begged her for the details, Nancy Drew told of her adventure with the robbers at Moon Lake. When she had finished the story, they praised her highly for what she had done. "We'll never be able to thank you enough," Grace said quietly, "but after the estate has been settled, we'll try to show our appreciation." It was on the tip of Nancy's tongue to say that she did not want a reward when Mr. Drew turned the conversation into a different channel. "The Tophams will not give up the money without a fight," Mr. Drew said. "My advice would be to ask the court to appoint an administrator at once." "We all want you, I'm sure," Grace Horner declared quickly. She regarded the others questioningly. Everyone nodded assent. "And of course we want you to act as our lawyer," Grace added. "I'll be glad to assist you. If the Tophams bring the matter into court, I'll give them a battle they'll never forget." After thanking Mr. Drew and Nancy for what they had done, the relatives at last took their departure. Allie and Grace were the last to leave. As they turned to say goodbye to Nancy, Mr. Drew opened a closet and took out the Crowley clock. "I guess this belongs to you now," he remarked, handing the clock to Allie. "It was included in Crowley's household goods." "I don't know what we'll do with it," Allie laughed. Presently, the Horner girls departed with the clock. On the porch, they paused to whisper significantly to Nancy, "You'll hear from us again." After everyone had left the house, Mr. Drew turned to his daughter with a smile. "Well, we administered the coup de grace to the Tophams, all right. Yes, wasn't it funny to watch their faces when they learned they were cut off without a cent? They took it hard. It's my opinion the Tophams won't be able to hold their heads so high after this. Richard Topham looked rather sick when he left. I suspect he's desperately in need of ready cash." "The Tophams deserved to be cut off without a cent," Nancy Drew declared. "I'm so glad everything came out right and that Allie and Grace received the bulk of the fortune." "Yes, they are charming girls. Unless I am mistaken, they intend to reward you for what you did, Nancy." "It wouldn't surprise me, but of course I'll not take money from them. However, if they should offer me a reward, I know what I shall ask for." "What is that?" "Oh, you must wait and see," and Nancy laughed mysteriously. "They haven't offered me anything yet." Before Carson Drew could quiz her, she skipped out the side door and vanished.
This marks the end of Chapter 24. We now move into the next chapter of story, Chapter 25, titled A Reward.
"I suppose you've heard about the Tophams," Carson Drew remarked to his daughter one morning some months after the reading of the Crowley will. "Why, no. What about them?" "They're practically in bankruptcy. Richard Topham has been losing steadily on the stock market of late. After his failure to recover the Crowley fortune, the banks reduced his credit. He's been forced to give up his home on the avenue." "No, really? How that must hurt Mrs. Topham and the two girls." "Yes, it's undoubtedly a bitter pill to swallow. They're moving into a small house this week,
and from now on they'll not be able to carry themselves so high. I hope they don't try to make any more trouble about the will, Nancy commented. Goodness knows they've made enough already. The Tophams had not given up the Crowley estate without a bitter battle. They had put forth the claim that the will Nancy had unearthed was a forged document, but they had been unable to prove their statement. The case had finally been thrown out of court. As administrator of the estate, Carson Drew had advanced the Horner girls and Abigail Rowan a portion of their inheritance. Several weeks before, Nancy had visited Abigail and was delighted to find her in surprisingly good health. She had secured medical attention, and a trained nurse was in constant attendance. "I believe I'll run out into the country today and visit the Horner girls," Nancy told her father. "They telephoned yesterday and asked me to come. They hinted they had something special to tell me." "Perhaps they're going to reward you for finding the will," Mr. Drew suggested. "Oh, it's been nearly a month since they said anything about it," Nancy returned carelessly. "By this time, they've probably forgotten all about it." After luncheon, she set off for the farmhouse in her blue roadster. It was a beautiful autumn, and Nancy Drew thoroughly enjoyed the ride. As she came within sight of the farmhouse, Nancy was astonished at the transformation which had taken place. The house had been given a fresh coat of white paint, and a bright green roof replaced the old one. The yard was well kept, and beds of hardy plants had been set out. In the barnyard, many new hen houses were going up. Perhaps the most surprising thing was the large number of chickens in evidence. "Welcome to the chicken farm!" Allie cried enthusiastically as she ran from the house to greet Nancy. "I never saw so many chickens in all my life," Nancy declared. "All leghorns, too," Allie told her proudly. By this time, Grace Horner had reached the roadster, and she too gave Nancy a hearty welcome. "Allie is in her element these days," she laughed. "She's putting in incubators, and from now on will raise nothing but high-grade fowls." "You must see everything," Allie insisted. Nancy was piloted from one place to another. She saw the new chicken houses which were being built and the incubators. But the thing which pleased her the most was the realization that Allie and Grace were happy in their work. "Well, I must be getting back to River Heights," she remarked after a time. "Oh, you can't go yet," Allie interposed with a quick glance at her sister. "You tell her, Grace." "We asked you here today for a special reason," Grace began, a trifle awkwardly. "You see, we've been thinking for a long time that we've never done a thing to show our appreciation for what you did. We've talked with the others, and everyone has agreed that we should reward—" "Oh, I don't want a reward," Nancy broke in. "I wanted to help, and anyway, it was fun for me." "But we wanted to do something really handsome," Allie cried in disappointment. "It doesn't seem fair not to give you a reward." "There's one way you can reward me if you really want to." "How?" Allie and Grace demanded in one breath. "Well, it may sound silly, but I would like to have the Crowley clock for my very own." "And is that all you want?" Grace questioned in disappointment. "We'll be glad to give you 100 clocks if you will only take them." "Just the old Crowley clock, that's all I care for. And if you particularly want it yourself—" "Oh, goodness, no," Grace assured her quickly. "It doesn't keep particularly good time, and we have more heirlooms now than we know what to do with. Wait a minute, and I'll get it for you." She disappeared inside the farmhouse, returning in a few minutes with the old-fashioned timepiece. She handed it to Nancy. "You're more than welcome to it," she declared warmly, "but it isn't a reward at all." "It's the only reward I want," Nancy replied, smiling at the two Horner girls. "I don't see what you want with the thing," Allie commented. "It's not much to look at." Nancy did not reply at once, but gazed meditatively at the clock. Truly, it was not handsome, but for her it had a peculiar appeal. She could not explain to Allie and Grace just why she prized it, for her feeling was something she could not put into words. Certainly, she was attached to it because of its suggestion of her recent adventure. "I wonder if I'll ever have one half so thrilling," Nancy thought. As she stood gazing wistfully at the old clock, she could not know that before many months had passed, she would be involved in a mystery far more baffling than the one she had just solved. Her adventures, recounted in the next volume of this series, The Hidden Staircase, were before her. Nancy Drew did not have the power of projecting herself into the future, and yet as she looked down at the timepiece, she seemed to know that exciting days were soon to come. "I'll always prize this clock as a trophy of my first venture as a detective," she said quietly, turning to Allie and Grace. "It will serve as a pleasant reminder of a thrilling adventure, and who knows, perhaps as a promise for the future."
And with that, our story comes to an end. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more content.